You may have met someone and wondered, why do they act the way they do? They might charm the room, make you feel seen, and then wound you in ways you can't explain. Often, the truth isn't in the present. It's in the past, in the childhood wounds they carried for years. In this video, I want to take you on a journey into how early experiences can shape a person into a narcissist, how those patterns ripple into relationships, and how understanding them can give you clarity, peace, and even healing. By the end of this video, you'll see narcissism differently, not just as cruelty, not just as manipulation, but as the echo of a child who didn't feel safe, who wasn't seen, who didn't feel loved enough. When most people hear the word narcissist, they think of arrogance, someone who's selfish, someone who only cares about themselves. But it's deeper than that. Some narcissists are loud, confident, charming. Others are quiet, subtle, hard to recognize at first. They might even seem humble. But underneath, there's the same wound. A deep, persistent insecurity, hidden behind a mask of confidence or control. That mask didn't appear out of nowhere. It was built in childhood. A time when showing real feelings didn't feel safe. Maybe they were punished for crying. Maybe they were ignored when they needed comfort. Or maybe they were only loved when they performed, when they made someone proud. So they learned to survive by hiding their true self. They learned to perform, to control, to appear strong, even when they felt small. Those survival strategies don't just disappear. They grow into adult patterns. The need to control. The need to be right. The fear of being seen as weak. Think of someone who criticizes over small mistakes. Or someone who shuts down when you get too close. Often, it's not just pride or cruelty. It's fear. The fear of being exposed. The fear of not being enough. The fear that love will vanish if they stop pretending. Let's go back to where it begins. Childhood. The place where every belief about love, safety, and worth is formed. For most narcissists, something went missing there. Not always something you can see, but something you can feel. A quiet ache. A need that was never met. A wound that kept growing in silence. Let's talk about the most common ones. Emotional neglect. A child who grows up unseen learns that emotions are dangerous. If they cried, no one came. If they were scared, no one noticed. So they stopped feeling. They learned to shut down, to pretend they didn't care. As adults, they struggle to connect. They can't handle someone else's pain, because they never learn what to do with their own. Conditional love. Some children are only loved when they perform. When they get good grades. When they look perfect. When they make the parent proud. Love becomes something to earn, not something they can simply receive. So they grow into adults who chase approval endlessly. Who can't rest unless they're admired. Who fear failure more than anything. Because in their mind, failure means rejection. And rejection feels like death, abuse or trauma. When a child lives in fear, they learn to survive by control. If they can't control their parents' anger, they'll control themselves, their world, and later, the people around them. Control becomes safety. Dominance becomes protection. But the truth is, there's still that scared child inside, trying to stop the next explosion. Overindulgence and lack of boundaries. Some children are given everything they want, except emotional guidance. They grow up believing the world revolves around them. That love is guaranteed, no matter how they treat others. Without limits, they never learn empathy. They never learn accountability. So when they face real consequences as adults, they lash out. They manipulate. They project blame, because their ego was never taught to bend. Each of these wounds creates a different mask. The confident mask. The charming mask. The victim mask. But underneath every one of them is a child, lonely, frightened, still trying to feel safe. When those childhood wounds go unhealed, they don't just fade away. They grow roots. They shape how a person sees themselves. And how they treat others. A child who was never seen becomes an adult who needs to be the center of attention. Because deep down, they're still trying to prove they matter. They interrupt, they dominate, they crave validation, not because they're confident, but because they're terrified of being invisible again. A child who was shamed for mistakes becomes an adult who can't take criticism. They explode when you point something out. Or they twist the story until you become the problem. That's not maturity, that's a defense mechanism. Their brain still believes that being wrong means being unloved. A child who grew up walking on eggshells becomes an adult who controls every detail. They can't relax unless everything, and everyone, moves the way they want. Because unpredictability feels unsafe. It reminds them of chaos. Of the fear they lived with every day. A child who was praised only for achievements becomes an adult who can't stop performing. They wear success like armor. They measure love in admiration. They burn out trying to prove their worth, over and over again. But no amount of praise can quiet the emptiness inside. And a child who was overindulged, who was never told no, becomes an adult who feels entitled. They expect others to bend, to cater, to forgive endlessly. When life doesn't go their way, they blame. They rage. Because they never learn how to handle disappointment with grace. These patterns might look different on the surface, but they all come from the same wound. I am not safe unless I'm in control. I am not enough unless I'm admired. I am not lovable as I am. The tragedy is, most narcissists don't know this is happening. They're not choosing manipulation or cruelty consciously. They're protecting the child inside them who never felt safe being real. Being close to someone with these wounds changes you. You start to question yourself. You start to shrink without realizing it. Because loving a wounded person often means being blamed for their pain. You might start to feel responsible for their moods. When they pull away, you chase. When they explode, you calm them. When they go silent, you try to fix it. You tell yourself they just need more love, more patience, more understanding. But deep down, you know something's off. Because love shouldn't feel like survival. When you're with a narcissist, your nervous system learns to live in defense. You scan for danger in every tone of voice. You replay conversations in your mind, trying to figure out what you did wrong. You begin to doubt your memory, your perception, your worth. And that's the wound they pass on to you. They were neglected, now you feel unseen. They were controlled, now you feel trapped. They were shamed, now you feel like you can't ever do enough. Without realizing it, their unhealed wounds become your burden. You carry their guilt, their anger, their emptiness. And you start to forget what your own feelings even sound like. If you grew up with a narcissistic parent, you might still hear their voice in your head, the one that says, "You're too sensitive. You're the problem. You should be grateful." That voice was never the truth. It was projection. Their pain, their fear, their shame, handed to you, disguised as your fault. If you loved a narcissistic partner, you know the confusion too well. The highs felt magical. The lows felt unbearable. One day, you were everything. The next, you were nothing. That constant cycle keeps your body addicted, to hope, to chaos, to the fantasy of maybe they'll change. But you can't heal someone who's still pretending they're not hurt. And if you're an empath, you probably saw their pain. You felt the little boy or little girl inside them. You thought your love could reach them. But love doesn't heal what someone keeps denying. Compassion can't replace accountability. And your empathy was never meant to become your prison. You can understand their wounds without losing yourself to them. Because your healing doesn't depend on them changing. It begins the moment you decide to stop carrying what was never yours to hold. Healing after narcissistic wounding doesn't start with them. It starts with you. With the moment you realize that their behavior was never your fault. That you didn't fail. You were trained to overextend. To overgive. To ignore your own needs just to feel safe. The first step is awareness. Seeing the pattern clearly, without minimizing it. Without explaining it away. You start to see the manipulation, the control, the emotional highs and lows. And you stop blaming yourself for reacting to pain. You begin to understand, your body wasn't weak. It was surviving. The second step is relearning safety. Because when you've lived in chaos, peace can feel unfamiliar. Silence can feel threatening. Healthy love can feel boring. So you start small. You learn to breathe again. To sit with stillness without waiting for the next explosion. You teach your body that calm doesn't mean danger. That peace isn't the silence before the storm. The third step is boundaries. Not to punish anyone, but to protect your energy. Boundaries say, I choose me this time. I no longer abandon myself to be loved. You stop explaining your worth. You stop apologizing for your truth. You stop trying to convince people to treat you right. Because healing means remembering you are not responsible for how others handle your truth. The fourth step is grief. You grieve the illusion. The version of them you hoped was real. The years you spent trying to be enough. Grief isn't weakness, it's release. You let yourself feel it, so it doesn't stay buried inside of you as shame or anger. And the final step is self-compassion. You begin to speak to yourself the way no one ever did. You validate your own pain. You celebrate your own progress. You remind yourself, I did what I had to do to survive. But now, I'm safe enough to heal. Healing doesn't erase the past. It rewires the meaning. You stop seeing yourself as the broken one, and start recognizing your strength. Because what broke you once is what now gives you wisdom, empathy, and the ability to see through manipulation. You don't have to hate them to heal. You just have to stop betraying yourself to understand them. When you start healing, something shifts quietly inside you. You stop craving intensity, and start craving peace. You stop needing to be understood by them, and start understanding yourself. You stop chasing closure, because you realize clarity is closure. Becoming the cycle breaker means you no longer repeat what hurt you. You learn to respond, not react. To listen to your intuition, not your guilt. To choose people who make you feel safe, not people who make you prove your worth. You begin to love differently. Softer. Slower. More consciously. Love becomes mutual, not survival. You can give without losing yourself. You can care without fixing. You can say no and still feel worthy of love. And the most beautiful part, you start to feel compassion not just for yourself, but even for them. Not in a way that pulls you back, but in a way that sets you free. You see the wounded child behind their mask. But you also see that it's not your job to heal them. You realize, you can understand their pain without returning to it. Every time you choose peace over chaos, truth over fantasy, boundaries over guilt, you are breaking generations of dysfunction. You are rewriting the story. You are proof that pain can end with awareness. That love can become safe again. And maybe, you'll never get the apology you deserve. Maybe they'll never see what they did. But that's okay. Because the greatest revenge is not becoming like them. The greatest healing is reclaiming the parts of you they tried to erase. You are not cold for protecting your peace. You are not cruel for walking away. You are not broken, you're becoming whole. And that is the kind of love you were always meant to find. If you've made it this far, take a moment to honor yourself. Because awareness like this takes courage. It means you're no longer living on autopilot. You're no longer mistaking chaos for love. You're starting to trust your own voice again. You're breaking the cycle, not just for yourself, but for everyone who comes after you. You're showing what real strength looks like. Not control. Not perfection. But truth. Remember, you can understand their wounds without reopening yours. You can forgive without returning. You can love without losing yourself. That's what healing is. You're not cold. You're not cruel. You're becoming whole. And if this message spoke to you, subscribe, so we can keep walking this healing journey together, one truth, one layer, one breath at a time.